There is a moment in your story that if you don't get it right, it doesn't matter what you write before or after, your reader is going to hate your story. This is the moment of your story where we see the protagonist's true character. This is what the whole story builds towards from page 1. This is the climax of your story. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up and nail your climax so your readers will love your story so much they tell everyone else to pick up a copy. My name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, and I've been working with writers for over 15 years. My partner is Sean Coyne. He's the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and he's a writer and editor with over 30 years of experience. This video is a continuation of my series on the 5 commandments of storytelling. Stories are about change, and the 5 commandments of storytelling is how you ensure that change is in your story. The first commandment was the inciting incident. And the inciting incident is 2 things. It's a ball of chaos that spins into the story and knocks the protagonist's life out of balance, and it is the event that puts the story in motion. The inciting incident is what is going to reveal the want of your protagonist. This is the thing your protagonist will be pursuing through the rest of the story. If the inciting incident was perceived as a negative thing by your protagonist, like a cancer diagnosis or a threat of a nuclear bomb, they're going to spend the whole story trying to get back to the way things were at the beginning of the story. However, if it was a positive thing that happened at the inciting incident, like a job offer or a potential love interest, your protagonist is going to spend the rest of the story pursuing that want. Now, as your protagonist pursues that want, things are going to keep popping up and getting in the way, and these are the progressive complications. These are the things that create the conflict and tension in your story as your protagonist pursues their want and things keep getting in the way. Now, the progressive complications build to the turning point. The turning point progressive complication is what pushes your protagonist to the point where they don't know what to do. They've exhausted their normal bag of tricks and they're in new territory. This is also the point where they realize they may not get their want, and if they do, they're going to have to give up way more than they ever thought they would. And this turning point progressive complication is what leads us to the crisis. Now, I've already done videos on the inciting incident and the progressive complications, and those links are down below this video. So make sure you go check those out so you can see how all of these actually work together. But in this video, I'm going to hit the next 2 commandments. We're going to talk about the crisis and the climax of your story. The result of the turning point progressive complication of your story is it pushes the protagonist to a point where they have to make a decision. It becomes a this or that binary decision, and this is the crisis of your story. And your crisis has 2 rules it has to follow. Rule number 1 is the choices have to be incompatible options. That means they can't get both things. The choices are mutually exclusive. By choosing one option, they automatically can't get the other option, and vice versa. And these incompatible options can be either good or bad. If they're good, they're irreconcilable good. So for instance, somebody is in love with 2 different people, but he has to choose. He can't be with both of them. If they're 2 bad options, it becomes a best bad choice. So if I'm hanging on a cliff, I have to choose to either jump to the next rock or fall in the water. Both are bad options, but I have to choose. Rule number 2 is meaningful stakes. This choice has to matter. So many times writers make it easy on their protagonists, or they make the choice trivial or obvious. That can't happen. We have to see your character truly struggle to make this decision. And because this choice has such meaningful stakes, it means your protagonist can't go back on the choice. Once they've made the choice, they are committed no matter what happens. If your crisis does not have meaningful stakes, it will kill your narrative drive. It will bring it to a screeching halt, and it will make your reader not care about your protagonist and what is happening to them. So you have to bring your protagonist to a choice between 2 incompatible options. They have to choose A or they have to choose B. And then making that choice has meaningful stakes. They're going to lose something and gain something with each of those choices, and it has to matter to them and squeeze them. So that's the crisis of your story, and it automatically leads us to commandment number 4, the climax. We have to see the protagonist make a choice. We have to see them choose between one of the 2 options. Now, it's really important here that the protagonist choose. You've probably heard of this idea of the deus ex machina, This is from Greek theater, when the playwright would bring God in at the end and use all of his magic to just sort everything out on the protagonist's behalf. We hate that as readers, and you can't do that to your readers. So we have to see your protagonist make the choice, because this is where we see the true character of your protagonist. So many times I get questions about character development, and it always comes back to the climax of your story. This is when we see who your character, who your protagonist truly is, because it doesn't care as people what we say, it matters what we do, and it matters what we do when something's on the line. My dad used to use this analogy all the time. He said, you can take an orange and you can dress it up however you want, you can cover it up however you want, but when it gets squeezed, you find out what it really is. And this is what's going to happen to your protagonist. From the moment of the inciting incident through all of those progressive complications, they're getting squeezed harder and harder and harder. And the climax is what we see what they're truly made of. So we've talked about the crisis and the climax. So let's look at our examples. We're going to go back to the examples from the progressive complications video, and we're going to look first at Crazy Rich Asians. So if you remember, Rachel is visiting Singapore with her wealthy boyfriend, and she's trying to get the family to like her. And the turning point is when the mother, Eleanor, says, "You will never be enough." This is the point where she realizes she's not going to get the family to like her. So in the next scene, she's thinking about just going home and giving up, and her friend Pick Lynn tells her she's got to get Eleanor's respect instead of trying to get her to like her. And I love the line where she's like, "Bok bok, bitches." So Rachel shows up at the wedding in full splendor. She goes to the party afterwards. And then this is where the grandmother and Eleanor gang up and attack Rachel, and Rachel runs off. And then her boyfriend Nick proposes, and he offers to leave his family and go with her. And this is what brings us to the crisis. The crisis for Rachel is, do I become someone I don't want to be in order to get what I want, which is a proposal from her boyfriend, or does she give all of that up to maintain her integrity? This is a true decision point for Rachel, because at this point she can get everything she wants. She can get Nick and she can stick it to Eleanor at the same time, but to do that, she'd have to give up her integrity. And so she makes the choice to turn down Nick's proposal. She confronts Eleanor, and then she sets off to go home with her integrity intact. So we see that crisis point, that crisis where she's got to make a decision, and then we see her make the decision. Now, let's take a look at The Martian. As you may remember, Mark Watney gets stranded on Mars, but he's clicking along pretty well. He's built a sustainable life for himself on Mars where he can survive until they can come back and get him in a couple of years. But then the turning point happens where the habitat is breached and his source of food is destroyed. And this pushes him to his crisis. And the crisis is, do I try to eke out a living on this planet and just slowly die, but at least it's in my control? Or do I try this harebrained attempt at a rescue, very small chance that it will work, and it will be certain and immediate death if it fails? And this is the part where they say at some point they're sending him into space in a convertible. I love that part. And of course, the climax is he chooses to go with this harebrained plan. One of the reasons I picked The Martian as an example in this video is because I wanted to show you how an action movie that follows a pretty standard script still works really, really well. Were any of us really surprised when he decided to go with the harebrained attempt to get rescued? Well, of course not. So why did it work if it wasn't surprising? It's because we get to see who Mark Watney truly is. Up until this point, he didn't have much of a choice to survive. He was really smart and he kept doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But the obvious point was if he didn't do the next thing, he would die. Where in this case, he had an actual choice to make. He could keep trying to eke out a living on Mars and maybe, just maybe, scrape it by and make it. Or he could try this crazy thing and risk everything to actually be rescued. So we find out something really important about Mark Watney's character when he chooses the plan to be rescued. It says something about who he is and what he thinks about the people coming to rescue him. And once again, this ties all the way back to the inciting incident. At the inciting incident of this story, Mark Watney wants to survive while stranded on Mars, and it's put all the way to the test and the climax of what he's willing to do to survive. Everything that comes before this point in your story is building to this point. The inciting incident, the progressive complications, the turning point progressive complications are all pointing to this moment in your story of crisis and climax. And so you've got to get this right. And this is why it's included in the 5 commandments of storytelling. Stories are about change, and the 5 commandments of storytelling are how you ensure that change shows up in your story. So like I said, I'm doing a whole series on this. I have links down in the description, but make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and hit that bell so you get notified of all the future videos we do on storytelling here at StoryGrid. Make sure you go to storygrid.com, sign up for the newsletter, and check out all of the other great resources we have available at our website. But as always, thanks for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.